Hello and welcome. This is the American Institute of Philosophical and Cultural Thought, which was started in 2016 and has pretty much aggressively pursued its mission since that time. And the mission has not creeped, but it has grown in terms of the number of people involved. In particular, I want to call attention to the fellows who are present because they help me with all kinds of things, including this conference. And so let's see, Myron Jackson, everyone has met. And Christian Murray is back there in the corner. Ken Stickers behind him. Right. What are you doing, George? Never mind. I thought you were raising your hand. I didn't see the phone. All right, Gary Herstein over here, Brian Stanfield over there, and there will be others here as well over the course of the conference. If you look at our website, which is americanphilosophy.net, you'll see a page for fellows, and it'll tell you something about each one of these interesting people. With that said, I want to thank them for their help, but most of all, I want to thank my two co-organizers who will be hosting on Tuesday and Thursday, Lona Geikis from the University of Vienna, and Matthew England, where are you? Oh, if you'd have been a snake, you'd have hit me, from Dakota State University. So you'll get a chance to know them because they're hosting on Tuesday and Thursday. Obviously the Langer Circle is to be thanked. Where is Iris? Oh, back there. Our sort of benevolent, and Adrian, our sort of benevolent founders of the feast, who essentially co-run with a small handful of other people, the Langer Circle. Although I admit that the idea for the Langer Circle was mine and Adrian's, I didn't really do the work. So anyway, it was a lot of work getting the Langer Circle started and getting it founded. Now, with that, one of the things that makes this possible, apart from the Langer Circle, is three organizations who are helping with in-kind or financial support. For today, the most important of those is the Foundation for the Philosophy of Creativity, which was started in 1957 by a guy named William S. Miner. And I am currently the William S. Miner Chair of Creative Communication at SIU. This is an endowed chair that rotates around among senior faculty in the Communication Studies Department. Bill Miner was Communication Studies. That's what he did, rhetoric professor. But anyway, he was one of those people who was recruited to Southern Illinois in the early 60s by our dynamic president, Dwight Morris, who was collecting professors who had been forced retired from their universities at 65 years old. And so what happened in the late 50s and early 60s was a great influx of fabulous faculty, including Buckminster Fuller, I might add, who it's like Dwight Morris went around scouring the countryside for people who still had another 10, 20 years in them. And so they all collected here in the late 50s and early 60s. That is probably what made SIU what it is. And SIU is the second organization that I need to turn to. Bill Miner taught at SIU for about 15 more years before he actually retired and lived here. He endowed not only the Foundation for the Philosophy of Creativity, but also there's chunks of money. This was a man who didn't lose any money in his life. You know what I mean? We all know somebody like that who's like investing and doing all this, like making all the right decisions, quietly getting rich. Well, fortunately for SIU, he split this extremely fortunate life and the results of it among a number of different causes at SIU, and there were some other places that benefited as well. Foundation for the Philosophy of Creativity has always been associated with SIU, but it actually does. It's not. There's no official affiliation between the Creativity Foundation and SIU. There is the Communication Studies Department, and there are several other sort of pools of money that we have tried to be judicious in spending in pursuit of the mission that he had in mind, and that includes pushing the idea of creativity in any direction that it will go. And so this afternoon's papers are all sort of this bio-psycho-Langerian creativity stuff, linguistic, creativity stuff. Bill Miner knew Suzanne Langer and liked her work very much. He was more of a Whiteheadian, but he had a deep appreciation for Langer's work. And so anyway, it is quite appropriate that we should use some of the funds that he left to sponsor this afternoon. Also, the endowed chair that I was fortunate enough to be elected to is helping as well, and that's the minor chair at SIU. And the third organization I need to mention is the Society for the Advancement of American Philosophy, to which I wrote a grant and to which they responded generously. And so that is why you're not having to pay for any meals or any registration or any of that if you're on the program. And so you got travel as well. And so I feel like they've been very generous with us and have made this possible. It is an ongoing association between the Foundation for the Philosophy of Creativity and its associated societies. AIPCT's programming, about half of it is sponsored by this group. And so anyway, with thanks to all of those folks, well, it reminds me, if you were getting travel assistance, I need your receipts so that I can start the paperwork and maybe it'll be done before you leave on Friday. Some of you are leaving a little sooner. But that said, so please see me about that. I appreciate your being here. I appreciate. You want to go get them, Lona? All right. There is a sign that says enter in back, but maybe you don't. Maybe not everybody. All right. Hey, Leo! Leo's here. This is my colleague, Leo Gazetko. And I didn't know he was coming, but I'm tickled to see him. All right, so sorry, Leo, you're going to have to sit in the front row. You were late. So anyway. All right, and there's Les. Another fellow of the AIPCT just wandered in, and he also is being punished by, this is Leslie Murray, he's being punished by being forced to sit on the front row. So you must not be a Methodist, because they would find a seat back, or make one, or sit on the floor. All right, so that said, I think I'm done with sort of all the thanks and the acknowledgments. What I've got now to do is to begin the process of introducing the speakers, and I'll do that one by one. And we begin with Margaret Browning, who did her PhD at the University of Chicago about halfway through life somewhere in there. Exactly. Of course, we don't know how far it's going to be, but it was a second calling is the point, and has been a practicing psychologist and independent researcher for quite a long time. She wanders around quite a lot. I see pictures of her with suntan in various exotic locations. I don't really know what this is. I mean, this is on Facebook, right? I don't know where she is. I don't even know where you live now.
Puerto Rico.
That's what some place with a lot of sun. I can tell you that. So Puerto Rico, and you've come all the way from Puerto Rico.
I have indeed.
Okay, that's great to know. So anyway, Margaret joined the Langer Circle as soon as there was one. And has been an active contributor to our conversations online and also at our first international conference in Frankfurt, which is where I got to meet her for the first time. I already know that you're going to enjoy what she has to say because I have it right here. And if I take this with me, I don't know what she'll say, but I won't. So with that said, please make Margaret Browning feel welcome.
Okay. I've been saying to people that it's so intimate, it almost makes you more nervous, like, oh, right, my slides here. Okay, I'm basically reading this, sorry, but I'll try to keep looking at people. I align myself with psychodynamically minded developmental thinkers who focus on the child's growth of a sense of self, as opposed to the more mainstream focus on neurocognitive cognition development. But I present a different image of the experiencing child. I argue that by integrating the philosophy of mind of Suzanne Langer with the neuroaffective science of Jaak Panksepp, I can present a distinctive picture of the development of subjectivity, the evolution of a life of feeling. Langer obviously said that in one of her books. I adore that expression. Okay. Langer attempts specifically to construct an image of mind for the psychological sciences, building around the concept of feeling as an organic definition of consciousness. This process includes all facets of our external and internal activity that are felt, facets arising from the vast domain of our unfelt organic being. Making use of Langer's dynamic construct, I present Panksepp's ideas about the development of what he terms our brain minds or mind brains. For Panksepp, brain-mind development is based on emotional systems operative at birth, which include an ongoing felt or subjective component. Panksepp maintains a distinction between emotions and affects, defining the former as organic brain systems and the latter as the continuing felt or conscious aspect of these systems. It is the development of Panksepp's affective life, the growth of Langer's life of feeling, that constitutes the evolution of our subjectivity. The healthy newborn comes into the world in a state of physical readiness to begin learning from experience, ready to be engaged in her environment through her primary emotional action systems, her primary brain functioning, an engagement mediated by her affective or felt state. This capacity to feel, to be conscious, is the engine of the child's subjective life, which will develop with the maturation of her brain and the acquisition of her physical, cognitive, and socio-emotional faculties, all highly dependent on her environment. The secondary growth of the brain-mind in Panksepp's model is early sensory motor learning through conditioning, motivated by the child's primary functioning, her primary emotion systems. The infant must continuously regulate her subjective state as she engages with her environment in these early months of learning. While her preverbal consciousness is mediating her learning, the learning process itself is unconscious. What is being learned emotionally? I mean, this is critical. What is being learned emotionally is not necessarily clear, even to her parents who are providing the environment in which she is growing. Preverbal consciousness is a non-reflective process which is difficult to understand from the perspective of our reflective symbolic minds. In fact, many people do not recognize it as a conscious state, but this non-reflective life of feeling is what transitions into a reflective life of feeling. This symbolic cognitive functioning, our tertiary brain-mind development, remains tied to our primary emotional needs and the secondary emotional learning of earliest childhood. Let me explicitly define my terms. I'm using consciousness to refer to any degree of feeling, from the lowliest level of sentience to the highest degree of conscious cognition, whole bit. And I'm defining this consciousness as subjectivity. I use the terms self-conscious and conscious interchangeably based on a position I subscribe to that living forms possess a sentience of their endogenous agency, Distinctions in self-consciousness can then be made in terms of a capacity to reflect, a faculty, I argue, we all argue, dependent on human symbolic language. Reflective self-consciousness may be what most people think of when they think of consciousness, but the distinctions between reflective and non-reflective processes is critical. As our brains mature and we develop a capacity to think symbolically, moving into a cultural society mediated by language, primary and secondary brain-mind functioning remain covert. While much of our conscious lives is becoming explicit with self-reflective, intentional learning, the unspoken foundation of our feeling continues to percolate through our minds. That's by introduction. I'm going to say a little bit about Langer. Who needs to hear about, anyway, something about Langer, then more about Panksepp, because Panksepp will be new to you, and then some commentary on the pre-verbal life of feeling, the verbal life of feeling, you know, sort of comments. For Langer, all functioning arising from our organic being is either felt or not felt. Feeling is the basis not only of our internal experience, but also the external world we perceive. Our integrating sensory systems render the world felt in sight and sound and smell and touch. It is this basis of feeling, the basis of all animal minds, Langer argues, that is uniquely engaged in the human species in a symbolic process, a projection of feeling into form. Human language is the quintessential expression of our unique symbolic capacity, and its use is what facilitates the child's symbolic development. Let's see. I guess the young child who has been mediating her interactions in the world through a self-regulated state of feeling or non-reflective consciousness while embedded in a language environment comes to discover the symbolic import of language. This is argued by Terence Deacon in his book, The Symbolic Species, Coevolution of Language and Brain. I just want to make a comment. I'm really emphasizing the child's agency. Agency has no place to go without an environment and all kinds of facilitative things. As a psychoanalyst, pediatrician said, the child has to find things for herself. She's got to find it. But parents have to put it there to be found. I mean, the child has to discover it, oh, I made this. But if no one puts it there, she's never going to find it. I had to take that quote out. Anyway, okay, so Deacon, from the familiar behavioral interactions that have been implicitly communicative, including via the sounds people make, the young child comes to understand the sociocultural significance of these sounds, moving from hearing spoken words as signs in listening action to grasping them as symbols in listening thought. The young child acquires the ability to explicitly and intentionally communicate with others. It's not just more, it's like, whatever. Okay, in the human, and let me see here. Okay, in the human species, the organic capacity to feel is not only the driver of our animal intelligence, it is also the driver of our symbolic functioning, our ongoing capacity, and in fact need to symbolically formulate our felt activities in a profoundly intersubjective theater. Indeed, symbolic rationalization is what is demanded of us in human society. Nevertheless, I contend that the continual process of producing and reproducing our collective intersubjective world is based on our many singular, organically based subjectivities. The animalian communicative capacity characterizing all social species is raised to a unique level in our species, allowing for a distinctive historical development in human collective living. While all mammalian young learn implicitly within their social environment and behave accordingly, mostly, in human society, we expect children to explain themselves explicitly in words, and behavior is expected to conform to explicit rules. Most importantly, from my perspective, the self-descriptions children learn to give to justify what they are doing become part of a dialectical process of creating themselves. I mean, you're describing what you're doing. It may all be bullshit. Get rid of that. But you're learning how it works. Okay, that's for Langer. Now Panksepp. Jaak Panksepp began his graduate studies in clinical psychology, but soon decided that the neural basis of emotional functioning was more important for understanding mental health, and he switched his academic training to the field of neuroscience. Clinically minded always, he was something of a loner in the world of neuroscientific research since neurocognitive studies were the rage. It was the age of the computer, and the mind's a computer, and we're figuring it all out. Just for historical purpose, Panksepp was born in 1943. He received his PhD in '69. He unfortunately died in 2017 after battling cancer. He was even more of a loner in arguing for a felt or conscious component of the emotional systems he was investigating in mammalian species, calling this felt aspect affective. Panksepp has papers written about rats laughing. I mean, he worked with rats and other things, but, you know, of course they laugh. Panksepp's lab investigations of mammalian brains are based on a shared perspective of evolutionary theory that animal brains have evolved in complexity along with the evolution of more complex animals, but have been built on top of what already exists. Newer structures emerge on top of older ones, whether or not the functioning remains the same. In the 1960s, In the 1960s, Paul MacLean described the evolutionary layering of the human brain as the triune brain. Number one is the reptilian brain, including brainstem and cerebellum. I could put a picture, I didn't, but everybody knows, you know, brainstem's right on top of your spinal cord. Cerebellum is this great piece back here, which used to only be thought of as motor coordination. I think it's much more sophisticated than that. But anyway, reptilian brain. Secondly, the limbic brain, seemingly emerging first in mammals and associated with emotions and learning. And thirdly, the neocortex. Neocortex, assuming great importance in the primate brain, particularly in the human species. Since the 1960s, this model has gained in sophistication, but Panksepp's big shift locates the innate emotional systems he posits as primary brain functioning in the oldest part of the brain, the brainstem. So, you know, we're talking primitive. Everybody's got a brainstem, well, with a nervous system, and your organic emotional systems are there, as deep as you can go in a nervous system. For Panksepp, emotional systems are unconditioned action systems. I mean, that's the whole point. You know, you're built in a system with unconditioned action systems with innate motor processes, serving as primal integrative procedures in the organism. Later in the paper, I have a quote from Panksepp saying, you know, people think that motor behavior is output, input, output. It's like, what? You know, motor behavior is vast integration of everything you're doing, right? Like this. This is self-regulating. Most importantly, emotional systems are accompanied by emotional affects or affective feeling states, the basis of animalian subjectivity. So poor Panksepp, you know, what are you studying affect for? We're not even sure it exists. And God knows these animals you're studying are not conscious. Probably some scientists were thinking their babies weren't conscious either. We're not sure. We're not sure about the baby yet. Whatever. Okay. In addition, this is sort of an aside. In addition to emotional affects, Panksepp identifies homeostatic affects, obviously feelings, hunger, thirst, etc., and sensory affects, which, you know, you people in aesthetics need to work with. Panksepp did nothing with that because he believed that the emotional affects really were the basis of mental health, and that was his interest. Panksepp refers to the next evolutionary level. We've got primary, secondary. I'm only on secondary. The seat of his secondary functioning as subcortical rather than limbic. So everybody's heard of the term limbic, but Panksepp talks, you know, cortical cognition, subcortical is all of this It's all emotional, mostly circuitry. Okay. Panksepp argues that secondary learning, a process of conditioning, takes place in earliest childhood and lays down a foundation of emotional memories as secondary emotion systems. Here's the import of his learning in his words, quote, "We will show that conditioning, which some people regard as a cognitive function, is nothing of the kind. It is an automatic brain response that does not require any neocortical participation in order to succeed." In the growing child, primary and secondary functioning guide the tertiary neocortical development of sophisticated cognitive capacities. So all these wonderful things children are learning, they're still based on primary emotion systems and that early emotional, not cognitive, emotional learning. Cognitive capacities, most importantly, of course, the use of symbolic language. Contrasting emotional and cognitive activity, Panksepp suggests, quote, "From an evolutionary perspective, it is wise to see these activities as distinct levels of control," unquote. Further, he says, quote, "Although cognitions and emotions remain conceptually blended in higher regions of the brain, mental health arises when this interpenetration is substantially, gently and with equanimity," I love that phrase, "regulated from both below and above." Gotta answer to both of these. The human brain is indeed a learning machine, but the neocortex, as the repository of vast cognitive learning, continues to be influenced by the primary emotional systems as they are bound in early secondary conditioning vis-a-vis the world. These first two levels of functioning provide the basis of value and direction as they motivate cognitive learning, and their accompanying affective feeling states mediate all processes of this tertiary functioning. I mean, that's an important thing. Think about your state of mind, always mediating what you're doing, what you're learning. Are you listening to this? Whatever. Brought into the work of neuropsychoanalysis by Mark Soames, who was instrumental in the founding of this new field, Panksepp co-authored with Soames an article arguing that the id, far from unconscious, is the brainstem seat of all emotional systems and their ongoing affective feeling states. And these systems are bound in early engagements with the world through secondary conditioning. They suggest that Freud's ego really refers to all the tertiary growth of the vast neocortical cognitive domain, which ironically remains preconscious, not felt as reflective consciousness until called upon for specific perceptual or cognitive material. Panksepp systems are not derived conceptually. It's based on his empirical work, based solely on careful empirical work from his own lab and the labs of others. Most of the neuro work outlining evolutionary mammalian similarities focuses on neuroanatomy and neurochemistry. The neural evidence is mostly gained from animal models, but there is also some evidence from human studies. Research conducted by Antonio Damasio's neuroscience group used PET technology to image the whole brain, while subjects were asked to remember powerful emotional experiences from their own lives. The study confirmed Panksepp's identification of the brainstem as the critical basis of all of his posited emotional systems. Additionally, Damasio's group found that many neocortical brain areas were deactivated during this recall of powerful emotional memories. The foundational emotional and procedural memories of secondary brain-mind development underlie the behaviors we engage in automatically throughout our lives. Besides such motor memories, for example, walking, procedural memories guide our engagement in the world with others and with our environment. Here's where Panksepp says this, quote, "We are so accustomed to seeing motor processes as mere outputs, as opposed to also being integrative processes for the organism as a whole," end quote. Procedural memories cannot be specifically identified as both episodic and semantic tertiary memories can be once we become reflectively self-conscious. It's like, oh no, when did I do that? No, there's no memory of when I learned that. We can only speculate about these earlier memories laid down automatically when we later become reflectively self-conscious and question the causes of unwanted behaviors in ourselves. Who's ever experienced an unwanted behavior in themselves? It's like, Jesus, what did I do that for? Anyway, with time and effort, this is short for however you do it, music maybe, whatever, we can try to override some of this early learning by substituting new approaches to engaging with the world, self-reflectively intentional approaches. You think about relationships. Why do I always do this? Why do I always do this? I'm going to try to adopt a new approach. And importantly, reshape your life of feeling. While Panksepp recognizes that the higher neocortical cognitive behavior of human beings will never be fully understood using rudimentary animal models, he emphasizes that our higher minds would collapse without their foundation in the fundamental mammalian mind-brain organization. And this is what he investigates through animal research. Okay, so here are his 7 systems. He capitalizes these common terms to make them technical for his work. These systems can vary somewhat organically between individuals, temperamental differences, but most importantly, they're molded by early experiences as they become bound in these early experiences, and they become bound in secondary brain functioning. It's a secondary emotional system. They become conjoined in specific interactional patterns learned by the infant toddler in her environment during her early weeks and months of life. At the same time, the more each system is activated during this early period, the more significant it becomes in the child's later emotional repertoire. Seeking. The seeking system impels us towards the world whose resources we need to survive and thrive. The system is the basis of our curiosity and excitement in exploring the world, and it also fuels all the other systems. I have a lot of quotes here from Panksepp because I felt like I don't want to mischaracterize anything. Here's a quote. There are many, many cognitive differences in such experiences, and he's talking about anything and everything that you do on a daily basis, that you care about, you're reading, you're writing, whatever. All kinds of cognitive differences, but the anticipatory urgency in all these activities shares a common positive want to do and can do feeling. Likewise, on the negative side, when the seeking system is chronically underactive, we experience a hopeless form of depression, characterized by lethargy and an absence of get up and go. Fear speaks for itself. Obviously, it's important for animal survival to experience fear in dangerous situations, whether an innate danger such as experiencing pain or a conditioned danger based on early learning. Here's what Panksepp says. Because we are so intelligent, we humans can learn to fear more things, past and future, than a little mouse can. Because of our neocortical capacities, we even come to fear insubstantial phantoms of the mind. The trick is to find out what's the phantom, what's insubstantial, whatever. We can even be anxious about becoming anxious. Ever experienced that? Okay. Rage is the basis for asserting oneself with others, and the human species has developed many ways to excel at this. With our vast cognitive capacities, we are able to endlessly experience the need to make claims for ourselves. Now, here's Panksepp. Hatred and revenge are tertiary processes. That's sort of interesting, huh? That reflect our capacity to think about the wrongs that we have experienced and to devise detailed schemes for retribution. We know Trump has been reading this, right? Anyway, perhaps most other mammals do not have the cognitive capacity to engage in such ruminations. Nevertheless, they do express rage, which is not fundamentally designed to punish, but rather to bring others in line rapidly with one's implicit desires. There's a legitimate place for rage, right? Not just on the highway. I mean, like,
Cats, they bring the world into line.
Right, right. Okay, lust also speaks for itself, ensuring the continuation of the species. Panksepp identifies lust as one of the fundamental emotion systems because it is an action system involving the entire body in both courting and copulatory behaviors. I won't digress on that. Unlike the homeostatic feelings of thirst and hunger, triggered only by circumscribed, God, Margaret, don't say circumcised. Get rid of that one. Circumscribed receptors, but you can imagine only, here and there. But lust, all over the place. Extensive lustful circuits within the animal brain. Seeking, fear, rage, and lust may have evolved earlier in the reptilian brain than the last three social emotional systems, which became particularly important in mammalian evolution: care, panic/grief, and play. The care system speaks for itself in terms of the enormous time and energy mammals invest in their offspring, who could not survive otherwise. The care system dovetails with the panic-grief system that keeps mammalian young attached to their mothers by instinctively crying out when they lose sight of her, at least. And I put this in, it's like, anyway, I just find this interesting. In the case of herbivore mammals whose young need to be able to run with their mothers soon after birth. I mean, imagine that, that little colt gets up and we gotta go. Already? Yeah. And they need to be able to cry out and say, hey, you're going too fast for me. In the human species, as in other omnivore and carnivore species essentially born as preemies from Panksepp's perspective, early social bonds form more slowly. It is not really until the second half of the first year that human infants begin to cry upon separation from their mother. The panic grief system is the basis of our deep need for social attachments throughout our lives. This system, at the same time, is the basis of all our social joys and happiness. It is unfortunate that Panksepp labeled this panic grief because it really slants it in one direction. I mean, truly, the point is it's our need for social relatedness, which is critical. Okay. Interestingly, pleasing social activity and endogenous opioids in the brain go hand in hand. Now that is interesting. Here's a quote. We also now know that a variety of positive social interactions, such as play, result in the release of endogenous opioids in the brain. Anyone have a smartwatch with opioid release on it? No, not yet. Okay. This is still Panksepp. Soon after the discovery of the role of endogenous opioids in regulating grief, it was discovered that oxytocin and prolactin, those are hormones, were comparably robust inhibitors of this system, and that they were capable of strengthening social bonds between infants and their mothers. I mean, that's sort of huge. You think about, depressed mothers on drugs, poor babies trying to find a life with a mother like that, and an intervention that can facilitate the connection. Play also speaks for itself, and it's usually pure delight, whether among young or old, although our quintessential image of mammalian play is, puppies and kitties, and our own children, right? Play is important for happiness as the urge to play carries over into the programming of higher brain regions and supports our capacity for creativity. Here is Panksepp, what he says about play. Play may consolidate the diverse behavioral components of different emotions under the sway of a feeling of social joy, allowing children to gradually develop habitual habitual, creative, and positive ways of responding to their physical and social environments. The play urge may be of critical importance in the cultural and epigenetic construction of sophisticated social brains. That's the end of that quote. Panksepp's model of his emotional systems is embedded in the maturation from brain-mind to mind-brain. With increasing tertiary functioning and the acquisition of emotionally shaped cognition, emotional organization becomes increasingly mind-brain, although there must always be some sort of balance between top-down and bottom-up, always. So the last two things here, and I'll make this quick. Just some thoughts about a life of feeling for the pre-verbal child. What am I going to say? Kids have all kinds of lives. But just some comments. Encountering the world, and I love that idea, encountering the world, and learning within these encounters is the task of the whole child, the active, endogenously motivated infant. The child's subjective state of feeling throughout these encounters is part of and a reflection of the child's capacity to self-regulate, She must continuously coordinate all bodily systems as she seeks and feels her way in learning about the surrounds of her caregiving environment. Having matured in utero to be equipped at birth with motor procedures serving as primal integrative processes for the whole child, the infant is ready to go. I mean, really, you're born, it's like, start learning, sweetheart. It goes on from here, right? Panksepp's emotional systems allow for great positivity in our lives as well as great negativity. We may hope for all very young children a solid attachment relationship with their parents, building a foundation in their early years for the joys of social interaction and intimacy throughout their lives. Some children suffer the deep tragedy of losing a parent in early childhood, experiencing the profound pain of loss associated with our social needs. Children with resilient temperaments may find other early attachment figures for building positive social memories after such a loss. Too many children, heartbreakingly, have emotionally unavailable parents who never help their children build joyful social memories in their early years. Panksepp's work helps us understand all the developmental deficits that may result, including a continuing life of social pain. Young children flourish being loved because love provides a feeling of safety for them to follow their endless curiosity about the world and dare to push themselves as far as they can to manipulate everything they see. I believe that as much as our ability to love, our capacity to be forever curious about the world is a great source of well-being throughout our lives. It makes for a subjective life that maintains a sort of resilience in the face of life's inevitable problems, a certain optimism to keep seeking different prospects and to keep anticipating excitement. Love and curiosity for the young child spill over into her capacity and indeed need to play. For Panksepp, the critical feature of our capacity to play is learning about others to develop our social sensitivities and sensibilities. Play is also recognized as maybe the source of creativity. Somebody will answer that question later. A capacity to put things together in new ways, to see new similarities between disparate entities. The emotional and procedural memories we lay down in playing in our early years build a foundation for whatever creative energies we have when we are older, and feeling creative is an important source of well-being. The experience of being well cared for is a big part of a positive early childhood, and young children may exercise some of their own caring instincts. However, how understandable is it for a child to show signs of both care and rage? At the birth of a younger sibling, I was the baby in the family, so I don't know about that. But I picked up rage along the way, not a problem. Conflict between emotional needs can be intense at any age, but particularly when we are young. Handling emotional conflict is part of developing the capacity to self-regulate. The emotional systems of fear and rage and their negative affectivity are an inevitable part of our lives. Children have to learn about what is dangerous in their environment. Of course, there are many dangers that we hope children never encounter. Certainly when they are very young and building up their emotional and procedural memories. Dangers, for example, from an impoverished environment. It's interesting to think about Panksepp's definition of mammalian rage and how this emotional system can function in the human species. Hopefully, children learn to feel safe in asserting themselves and their needs when they are young and do not develop a chronic sense of defensiveness and rage. Rage is also a response to frustration, and kids need help from parents to learn to manage this well, to recover from an often serious disruption of frustration and move on with what they're trying to learn. Panksepp's model emphasizes the profoundly shaping influence of our early caregiving environment as we lay down foundational emotional and procedural memories. Memories we will not be able to explicitly remember when we grow up and become self-reflective. They are memories that may profoundly disrupt our later lives. With committed effort, we can speculate about them later in life and try to make intentional changes to the action patterns that became automatic in our earliest years. We can try to recover our positive instincts for experiencing love for other people, love for the wonders of the world, and love for our own playful minds. Okay, just very briefly here. Children moving into language. I mean, so much is going on without language, but you get into language and, the whole ballgame changes, for better or worse. With the onset and expansion of the use of a symbolic language, children are continuously internalizing the cultural meanings mediating their environments. At the same time, I contend that their own organic agency and self-regulation of feeling is maturing in their continuing brain development, and they are bootstrapping their personal subjective lives in an explicitly intersubjective world. Kids respond to environments very differently. It's their own thing. Young children have their own unique imaginative capacities driven by their core emotional systems of seeking and playing, a creative capacity that continues throughout their lives. Langer would say that we have a basic need to express ourselves, and biologist Andreas Weber would say it's an expression of being alive. Developing a capacity to symbolize supports an infinite faculty for exploring our external world as we learn to make finer perceptual distinctions and develop increasingly complex models of how the world works. It is the infinite symbolic capacity to explore how we work that can be more challenging, trying to understand our emotional lives. Presentational symbolisms, as Langer identifies them across all art forms, project resonant images in which we recognize subjective feeling. Here's how Andreas Weber puts it. I love this quote. An artistic symbol expresses the feeling of being alive that we cannot explain in all its depth and all its detail. Doing this, the work of art itself, in the end, is not totally explainable. To help us understand, it must remain a riddle. I think that really gets at artistic things. It's like, so what is this about? Oh. Okay, last thing here. Our emotions are never totally clear, particularly as they develop in cognitive complexity through time, but we can undertake the self-interpretations expected by society as seriously as we wish to. We can attempt to articulate explicitly what we are feeling and in turn open ourselves up to a deeper sense of inwardness. Herein is the potential for change as we move from the pre-reflective self-consciousness of childhood to the reflective self-consciousness of adulthood. We can begin to question what we learned early in life, what we will never explicitly remember learning, but what seems to be a part of us. Our tertiary functioning, our capacity to explicitly try to understand ourselves, provides the possibility for change. Just one. Philosopher Paul Ricoeur suggests that we make and remake our lives through the narrative use of language, while science pretends to exist outside of any context. Is that correct? I'm looking at the scientist over there. Okay. Ricoeur argues that communicative and poetic uses of language are situated within a temporal consciousness. Children learn to explain themselves in narrations, including a past, present, and future, as their communication skills mature. Growing up with storytelling, children also learn how language can be used to imagine a different world. Storytelling continues to show us who we are as well as who we might be. The end. Yeah.
Oh, let's see. So I'm just going to let Margaret handle her own questions. Okay? I think everyone's alive back there. All right. Oh, so you just go ahead.
Okay.
Margaret, a lot of questions, but here's one substantive one that I'd be interested in hearing you react to, and that is, despite the importance or increasing importance of emotion in artificial intelligence research, that nothing seems to me more
Difficult.
what would be the right phrase, completely alien to the research done there in AI and the kind of account you're giving of symbolism and learning and the role of emotions in that.
Well, I mean, what even approaches the capacity to feel in AI at this point?
There you go, and that's you can't have that conversation. It sounds like anthropomorphism as opposed to a serious scientific discussion of the relation of mind and body. You said just a moment ago, science seems context independent, or well, maybe that's what I said in response to your question to us. But it is. I mean, the whole point of it is you're supposed to be invariant in the researcher. It shouldn't matter where or who is undertaking an experiment and learning from it and transmitting that knowledge. Whereas for the kind of developmental psychology you're talking about that leads to things like learning and speech and relationship to the world and so forth, well, the simplest way would be to say that it's alive. And a machine, the context, the server that hosts the algorithm, is not alive and has only a external relatedness to the context of its operation.
You know, I want to say something. Mark Soames is a neuropsychoanalyst, and I think he's terrific. And his last book, Jaak Panksepp was totally his mentor, but his new mentor is, God, now the name escapes me, maybe Julian. What is his name? Anyway, free energy principle, thermodynamic, he's, I can't, Friston. Somebody, Friston, ever heard of, okay. Anyway, Mark Soames, who's wedded to, it's like you'll never develop a machine that's conscious. I mean,
Right.
You just can't. It just won't happen. But now he's tuned into this, Friston it is, free energy principle, and it's a thermodynamic, dynamic system. And Mark Soames is like, you know what? I think it might produce consciousness. And actually, his research now is let's try to build that machine based on this thermodynamic principle. I don't know, Julia. Robert Craig got me, thermodynamics and I don't know much about thermodynamics. But it's intriguing. But anyway, I'm still of the mind, and also the hope that you can't make something conscious, a machine conscious. I don't know, what do you think, Eldridge?
What about feeling? That's what you can't do.
I think feeling, I really do think feeling is consciousness. I think consciousness is feeling. I mean, that's what I take from Langer. And that's why I fell in love with Langer. It's like I went into psychology and they never heard of consciousness. It's like, what? What? Why am I in this field? Who's studying consciousness? I don't know. Does anybody think AI can come up with consciousness?
Well, it depends how you define. I mean, there's a degree of consciousness in the model you were sharing. That's what's interesting. There are degrees of complexity and
Right.
feedback.
And
so
I
on
would
and
say
so forth.
whatever the lowest level
So
is.
whatever the lowest level is, I mean, if there's obviously some kind of self-affection. So, you know, you could put a mathematical measure on, maybe not on these LLMs, but on certain devices, and then call that consciousness if you want, but it's not going to be feeling
Right.
of a living organism
Yeah,
in the
that's a
environment.
stipulation.
That's pretty obvious. So it seems like there's a huge stipulative aspect to these. I mean, these young people at NYU were doing these things, but I mean,
Randy,
yeah,
what
you
do
could
you
measure
think about
affection,
consciousness
but
and
it's not.
artificial intelligence?
I think a lot of things about it, but what I will say is that I really appreciate that you defined really clearly what you mean by those words in this paper
Right.
before you start, because what I've discovered is with regard to feeling, consciousness,
Yeah, it's all over
sentience,
the board.
yeah, it's all you can do is say, I'm doing it this way.
Right.
Here's how some other people do it that
Yeah.
might contrast.
Right.
I mean, Terrence Deacon is a good example of somebody who's got a really worked out view of all of this. And so, with that said, I think the best you can do is say, look, I don't know whether there's a hard problem of consciousness or not. Here's how I am using these words in this. But in terms of, it's like the work of art, the way you were talking about it,
No.
I don't know that you could fully explain it even
Right.
if it was sitting right in front of you. It's like, here's consciousness. It's just like the gesture you said. It's like, eh. So that's what I think. AI, is it conscious? No.
No.
But that
not
means,
now.
but if you want to use the word consciousness to describe that kind of processing, then you better come up with another word for the thing that it's not doing.
But the real thing is, what is the human emotional response to the machine?
Mm.
I mean, we're always wondering about the machine, but I mean, isn't the real thing human to human interaction in the presence of machines? Isn't that what we should be talking about when we talk about AI and emotions?
That was the question I
Marion
was.
has something to say.
That was the question I was going to ask or talk about. One, because there might be something. It really depends on how you define it, but certainly it's not going to be motivated. Because one of the main things was motivation.
Right.
What motivates it to grow, to
Right.
learn, and there's
Right.
something.
And there's no agency. I mean, motivation is, I'm an agent. I'm in the world.
Yeah, and so I think that's even something more difficult to deal with in terms of what we want to allow it to do and exist among us. But in terms of the interaction, we're talking about, especially with folks on children, I'm really thinking about how much of this development process is being shaped by algorithms or being developed when people interact with algorithms that are not necessarily conscious or are not. It's a very specific environment, and so I feel like, because I teach a lot of students, they're engaging with artificial intelligence and shaping their emotional development, emotional learning, and perhaps I don't know if you. I want to also argue would you see something like distortions occurring in how they're perceiving their environment through getting this kind of reaction system that's constantly stimulating them, or is it just different, right?
So you're saying you think kids are exposed to algorithmic learning these days?
Well, their learning and development is being influenced by algorithms through social media platforms.
Oh.
So they're constantly getting like things they like, things they don't like, and and it's making connections for them. Being
Yeah.
I can tell you, for instance, like. I'm into like gaming or things like that, right? So when I got a new YouTube account, I was looking at gaming. I immediately started getting stuff that's like critical of feminism and things like that. Like it's not even something that like I was looking at. I was like, oh, I like certain gaming channels, and immediately it's things of like, oh, why are these women being put in Star Wars? I'm like, okay, I'm not into Star Wars, right? But I mean, I like it, but I'm not into it like that, right? So there's this way in which, but this is an algorithmic process that's shaping their consciousness, but it's not interaction.
A kind of culture, right? I mean, culture's always shaping kids.
Yes.
One way or the other.
Yes, exactly. And so that's why I was wondering how you were seeing this. Because,
Well, and that's why I made the comment. I mean, I do think that, you live in a culture and you're just immersed in it, but you still have your own sense of self.
Yes.
Not explicitly at all, but, your motor behavior is your own. Look, I'm doing this. You know, there's still something. Eldridge and I were talking about this yesterday, sort of. I mean, of course, you have an individual organism, you know, and Maxine Sheets Johnson talks about, you know, inside and outside. That's the definition of life, right? You have a living something, you've got an inside, and she attributes intrinsic agency to that. I mean, once you've come up with the molecular entity that has created a membrane and has said that's outside, this is inside. Of course, the whole point is you can't live without interaction with the outside, and you're constantly back and forth. So, you know, in a way, why even, I don't know, that sort of fuzzy, phenomenological, philosophical,
I think you make a good point when you bring up getting exposed to things that aren't of interest to you, and you as an agent have to choose whether or not to, you know, click on it or, you know, get it out of your history or whatever you do. And if we treat children as having their own kind of agency and we teach them how to make decisions like that as well, then when they get exposed to this culture online, they can decide as well what to not click and what to click, and whether or not they feel they need this unnecessary positive reinforcement that's creating this, you know, different reality than, well, that's maybe not the right word for it, but I think we live in an information age, and it's easy enough for kids to get access to knowledge as we understand it conventionally. What they need is to understand emotional knowledge and understand how to, like you say, self-regulate in a world where they're getting information at, you know,
and of course it's all
constantly.
kind of implicit, right? Polanyi. Yeah, tacit. I mean, these things, when you said teach kids to make their own choices, I mean, it's something I don't think you explicitly teach. You model it. You model this sense of, you know, being an agent.
Well, you allow it almost.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
give them the space to have that agency.
And that's why I
Which
love
is
this,
important.
Donald Winnicott, pediatrician, became a psychoanalyst, saying, you know, and the facilitating environment, totally important. But this idea of you have to put the object there, the child has to find it, and the child has to create it. But you gotta put it there for the kid to find it. I mean, it's such a perfect picture of, you know, you gotta present the world to the child, but you let the child discover it, right?
And just one little quick thing, but that was the main thing I was thinking about, was that exact quote where he said you have to put it there.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, did you see a difference when there isn't a you putting it there in the same way, right? That this is particularly putting it there so that they can develop a certain type of emotional reaction and then return to that platform, return to these other things in a different way than maybe you might see with parents or community figures or maybe even animals or other entities in the world.
If something was there or not there, I don't.
Yeah,
It's
so
on your phone. Yeah. Or on your screen as opposed to
being
and it's dragged up by a particular
intentional
algorithm
agents presented.
to make you, to try to maximally stimulate you towards reactiveness and make your sense of self regulation integrated with that digital system.
Yeah.
So they want you to be like, well, I got likes, so I feel good today,
Yeah.
right? And I was wondering if you saw that as different than like normal cultural influences or not. That's it.
An interesting aspect of this, though, is I don't know if anybody's read the book by Nicholas Carr called The Shallows. And Nicholas Carr makes the point that and you talk about AI and its capacity for agency, and it's, you know, the things that make us distinguish, you know, the Turing test. What are we talking to? We may be lessening our standards for that, and it comes from how we are interacting with social media, how students are interacting with sound bites rather than, you know, obviously the people in this room are geared to concentrated thought. That's what you all do. I understand that. The average student who's getting his information from Wikipedia, the nameless, faceless, which could be good information, could be crap. Who knows? I don't. You can cut that. But the concern is, and this is actually a concern of the gentleman I mentioned earlier. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the work of Merlin Donald. Merlin
Actually,
Donald
I
is
do know
worried
that.
that we're
Go ahead.
moving too fast, and we're going to move so fast that the capacity for AI doesn't need to reach these high limits because we're coming down to it.
Yeah, yeah.
And that has some ominous dystopian aspects.
Yeah, it does.
I'm not saying we're there yet, but The Shallows has a lot to say, and it concerns me that, because Donald's whole point is that what transforms our epistemology, our how we learn, and all of the rest is now driven not so much by biology. Not saying that none of this is correct, it obviously is, but it's now being driven culturally. And if you think about when we were a pre-literate culture, and we learned writing, and then when we learned printing, we lost, and this has been shown in pre-literate societies, we've lost our ability to remember. The capacity for a pre-literate culture to remember things is far higher than anybody's in this room.
Socrates and the fetus, yeah.
Yes. I mean, I'm not saying that. I just think The Shallows is,
Quick, we better.
I've read it a couple of times and it makes me, I'm not even going to read it anymore. It makes me too nervous.
We'll give Margaret the last word on the Shallows here, and
Out of my depth.